Before we begin this journey into the deepest mysteries of time itself, I want to invite you to get comfortable, dim your lights, settle into your favorite position, and prepare to drift through 4 billion years of Earth's hidden history. If you enjoy falling asleep to mysteries that challenge everything we think we know, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our explorations into the unknown. Now, let's begin. Imagine standing on a beach 300 million years before the first dinosaur ever drew breath. The sand beneath your feet is not sand at all, but crushed volcanic glass. The sky above churns with colors you've never seen, painted by an atmosphere your lungs could never process. And there, in the distance, rising above ancient mountains that would be eroded to dust long before T-Rex walked the earth, stands a structure, a tower, a monument. Something built with purpose, with intelligence, with intention. This is not fantasy. This is not science fiction. This is a question that keeps geologists awake at night, that haunts paleontologists in quiet moments, that philosophers and physicists whisper about in the conference hallways. What if they were here first? What if an entire civilization rose, flourished, built wonders, and vanished so completely that even their memory was ground to powder beneath the weight of geological ages? What if we are not the first to ask these questions, but merely the latest? Tonight, we will walk through deep time itself, exploring a possibility so profound it reshapes our understanding of life, intelligence, and our place in the cosmic story. We will examine evidence hidden in ancient rocks, patterns in the geological record that refuse to make sense, and mathematical probabilities that suggest something extraordinary may have happened in Earth's deep past. The question is not whether advanced life existed before the dinosaurs. The question is whether we would even recognize the evidence if it did. To understand why an ancient pre-dinosaur civilization is not just possible, but perhaps even probable, we must first comprehend something that human minds are not naturally equipped to grasp: the almost incomprehensible vastness of geological time. We must learn to think in deep time, where millions of years are mere moments and entire mountain ranges rise and fall like waves on an ocean. Earth formed approximately 4.54 billion years ago from a disk of dust and gas orbiting our young sun. For context, if we compressed Earth's entire history into a single 24-hour day, modern humans would appear at 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 56 seconds. We would occupy the last 4 seconds of the day. Recorded human history, all of our civilizations, wars, monuments, and achievements would flash by in less than a quarter of a single second. The dinosaurs, those ancient rulers of the Mesozoic era, would have their entire reign compressed into about 45 minutes of this 24-hour day, appearing around 10:30 p.m. and vanishing at 11:15 p.m. They dominated Earth for approximately 165 million years, a span so vast that Tyrannosaurus rex lived closer in time to watching Netflix than to seeing a living Stegosaurus. Yet even this enormous reign represents less than 4% of Earth's total history. But here is where our journey becomes truly unsettling. Before the dinosaurs ever evolved, Earth had already existed for over 4 billion years. 4 billion years of geological processes, climate shifts, continental movements, and biological evolution. 4 billion years during which life struggled, adapted, diversified, and repeatedly reached for complexity. 4 billion years that remain largely mysterious to us, despite our best efforts to read the story written in stone. Consider the Precambrian era, that vast stretch of time before complex life appears in the fossil record. It represents nearly 90% of Earth's history, stretching from the planet's formation to approximately 540 million years ago. For billions of years, life existed primarily as single-celled organisms, microbes forming vast colonies and slowly, patiently, altering the chemistry of the atmosphere and oceans. Then, in the Ediacaran period around 600 million years ago, something changed. Complex multicellular life appeared, strange organisms unlike anything alive today, creating the first large creatures Earth had ever known. But even these Ediacaran organisms emerged after 3.5 billion years of microbial evolution. 3.5 billion years during which plate tectonics ground continents together and tore them apart, during which asteroid impacts reshaped the surface, during which the climate swung between hothouse conditions and snowball Earth scenarios, where ice covered the planet from pole to equator. 3.5 billion years of history, most of which remains hidden from us behind the veil of deep time. This is the crucial point. The further back we look, the less evidence survives. Rocks are not eternal archives. They erode, they melt, they are subducted beneath tectonic plates and recycled into the mantle. The oldest rocks on Earth's surface are just over 4 billion years old, rare survivors from the Hadean Eon. And they are worn smooth and altered by heat and pressure until they barely resemble their original forms. Any rocks older than that have been destroyed completely, consumed by our planet's restless geology. Even from more recent times, the geological record is maddeningly incomplete. Paleontologists often reference this as the incompleteness of the fossil record, but the problem goes far deeper than simply missing fossils. Entire geological periods have left barely any accessible rock formations. Vast stretches of time are represented by single layers of sediment, compressed and altered beyond easy interpretation. Reading Earth's history is like trying to reconstruct a million-page novel when 99% of the pages have been burned, and the remaining pages are written in a language that changes its meaning over time. Now, consider what this means for our question about ancient civilizations. If a technological civilization had existed on Earth 500 million years ago, during the Cambrian period, when complex life was just beginning to diversify in the oceans, what evidence would remain today? The answer is both simple and disturbing, almost certainly none that we would recognize as artificial. Think about what will remain of our current civilization a mere 10,000 years from now. Most of our cities will be unrecognizable ruins, if they exist at all. Coastal cities will be drowned by rising seas or exposed by falling ones. Buildings will collapse under their own weight without maintenance. Steel will rust. Concrete will crumble. Plastics will break down under ultraviolet light and microbial action. Even our most impressive structures, things like the Hoover Dam or Mount Rushmore, will erode away given enough time, worn down by wind and water and the slow, patient work of chemistry. After 1 million years, virtually nothing will remain on the surface. After 10 million years, even buried structures would be compressed, fractured, scattered by tectonic forces. After 100 million years, the only trace of humanity might be a thin layer of unusual chemical signatures in sedimentary rocks. A strange abundance of certain isotopes, perhaps some crystalline structures that could be mistaken for natural formations. After 500 million years, after those rocks have been buried, heated, lifted, eroded, buried again, subjected to unimaginable pressure and geological violence, even those traces would be questionable at best. And this assumes we are looking for them. This assumes we know what to look for. This assumes that an ancient civilization would use the same materials, the same technologies, the same approaches to construction that we use. What if they didn't? What if their entire technological paradigm was so fundamentally different from ours that we literally cannot recognize their artifacts as artificial? Deep time is not just long, it is erasive, it is transformative. It takes monuments and grinds them to dust, takes dust and compresses it into stone, takes stone and melts it into magma, takes magma and lifts it into mountains, takes mountains and erodes them back to dust. Over hundreds of millions of years, this cycle repeats again and again, each iteration destroying more evidence, obscuring more details, making reconstruction more difficult. Yet, life found a way to leave traces. Fossils survive, though they represent less than 1% of 1% of all organisms that ever lived. Chemical signatures persist in certain rocks. Patterns in geological formations tell stories about ancient climates and environments. If we look carefully, if we know what to look for, if we are lucky, we can glimpse fragments of the deep past. So the question becomes, if we found evidence of an ancient pre-dinosaur civilization, would we recognize it? Would we understand what we were seeing? Or would we classify it as an unusual geological formation, a strange chemical anomaly, a quirk of fossilization, and move on without ever realizing what we had discovered. Before we can answer these questions, we need to understand what life was doing during all those eons before the dinosaurs. We need to understand how evolution works across deep time, how intelligence emerges, and why the rise of technological civilization might not be as unique or as unlikely as we assume. We need to understand that Earth has been a living world for nearly 4 billion years, and intelligence in various forms has been emerging and re-emerging across that vast span far more often than most people realize. Life on Earth began somewhere between 3.8 and 4.1 billion years ago, emerging in an environment that would be utterly hostile to most modern organisms. The early Earth was a violent place, still being bombarded by asteroids and comets, its atmosphere lacking free oxygen, its oceans rich with dissolved metals and volcanic gases. Yet in this harsh primordial soup, chemistry became biology. Self-replicating molecules appeared, began competing for resources, started evolving, and the great experiment of life on Earth had begun. For the first 2 billion years, life remained simple. Prokaryotic cells, organisms without a nucleus, dominated the planet. Bacteria and archaea formed vast colonies, creating stromatolites that still exist in a few protected locations today, living fossils that connect us to Earth's most ancient ecosystems. These microbes were not primitive in the sense of being poorly adapted or simple in function. They were and are biochemical marvels, capable of surviving in boiling water, in frozen ice, in acidic pools, in the dark depths of the ocean, even in the upper atmosphere. They created the first global civilization, though not one we would recognize, a worldwide network of microscopic life that began the slow process of terraforming Earth into a planet suitable for more complex organisms. The most important thing these early microbes did was invent photosynthesis. Around 3 billion years ago, cyanobacteria evolved the ability to use sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen. This was one of the most significant events in Earth's history because the oxygen they released as waste was toxic to most of the other life forms existing at the time. The Great Oxidation Event, beginning around 2.4 billion years ago, was Earth's first mass extinction, a catastrophic pollution event that killed off vast numbers of anaerobic organisms and fundamentally restructured the chemistry of the planet. But oxygen also created opportunities. It enabled more efficient forms of metabolism. It allowed for greater size and complexity. And eventually, around 2 billion years ago, it enabled one of the most important transitions in the history of life, the evolution of eukaryotic cells. These cells, with their nucleus and specialized internal compartments called organelles, arose through a process called endosymbiosis. Larger cells engulfed smaller ones, but instead of digesting them, they formed partnerships. The smaller cells became mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, or chloroplasts, the factories where photosynthesis occurs. This merger created cells capable of much greater complexity and efficiency. For another billion years, eukaryotic cells remained primarily single-celled organisms, though some formed colonies and began experimenting with simple multicellularity. Then, sometime around 800 million years ago, true multicellular life emerged. Cells began specializing, taking on different roles within a larger organism. Some became devoted to gathering food, others to reproduction, others to structure and support. This division of labor allowed for the evolution of larger, more complex body plans. The first animals appeared during the Ediacaran period, around 600 million years ago. These strange organisms looked like nothing alive today. Some resembled quilted mattresses lying on the seafloor. Others looked like fractal ferns, branching patterns repeated at every scale. Still others defied description entirely, geometric patterns and strange symmetries unlike any modern animal. Most left no descendants. They were evolution's first experiments with large body plans, and most experiments failed when conditions changed. Then came the Cambrian explosion, beginning approximately 540 million years ago. Over a relatively brief period of perhaps 20 million years, an eye blink in geological time, most of the major animal body plans that exist today appeared in the fossil record, Creatures with hard shells, articulated limbs, sophisticated eyes, and complex behaviors suddenly filled the oceans. This was not because evolution suddenly accelerated, but because the basic toolkit for building animal bodies had finally been perfected, and natural selection began exploring all the possible ways to use those tools. This is where our story about intelligence really begins, because the Cambrian explosion was driven in large part by the evolution of predation. Once some animals started eating other animals, an evolutionary arms race began. Prey needed better senses to detect predators. Predators needed better senses to find prey. Prey needed better escape strategies. Predators needed better hunting strategies. This back and forth drove the evolution of increasingly sophisticated nervous systems, more complex behaviors, and eventually, the first glimmers of what we might call cognition. Now, here's the crucial point that most people miss. Intelligence has evolved independently, multiple times, in multiple lineages, using different neural architectures throughout the history of complex life. It is not a rare accident, not a lucky fluke that happened once. It is a common solution to common problems, a strategy that natural selection discovers again and again whenever conditions favor it. Consider the cephalopods, octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish. These marine mollusks evolved intelligence completely independently from vertebrates. Their most recent common ancestor with us was a simple worm-like creature living over 600 million years ago. Yet modern octopuses can solve puzzles, use tools, recognize individual humans, learn through observation, and possibly even dream. They have complex behaviors and sophisticated nervous systems distributed throughout their bodies, with more neurons in their arms than in their brains. This is alien intelligence, literally what intelligence might look like if it evolved on another planet, and it evolved right here on Earth alongside us. Consider corvids, crows, and ravens. These birds can make tools, understand water displacement, recognize faces, hold grudges, plan for the future, and possibly possess a theory of mind, the understanding that other individuals have their own thoughts and perspectives. Their brain structure is completely different from mammalian brains, yet they achieve cognitive abilities comparable to some primates despite having brains the size of a walnut. Consider parrots, particularly African gray parrots, which can learn vocabulary, understand concepts like same and different, grasp numerical concepts, and engage in something resembling conversation. Consider cetaceans like dolphins and whales, with their complex songs, sophisticated social behaviors, and cultural transmission of knowledge. Consider elephants with their long memories, tool use, apparent mourning of their dead, and complex social structures. All of these lineages evolved their intelligence independently. All discovered that being smart, being able to solve novel problems, being able to adapt behavior to changing circumstances was valuable enough to justify the enormous metabolic cost of maintaining a large, complex nervous system. Intelligence is not rare. It is a common emergent property of complex nervous systems facing complex environments. But there is a crucial distinction between intelligence and what we might call technological civilization. Many species are intelligent, many can use tools, many have complex social structures and culture, but only one species on Earth today has developed technology sophisticated enough to fundamentally alter the planet, to leave traces that will persist in the geological record, to reach into space and contemplate our place in the universe. Only one species has crossed that threshold into what we might call industrial or technological civilization. Why? What made humans special? The answer is probably not intelligence alone. Dolphins might be as intelligent as humans in certain ways, but they live in water, which makes controlled fire impossible, which makes metallurgy impossible, which makes most paths to advanced technology impossible. Octopuses are remarkably intelligent, but live only a few years, too short to accumulate much knowledge or pass on complex cultural information. Crows are brilliant, but lack the anatomy to manipulate objects with the dexterity needed for fine manufacturing. Humans succeeded in developing technology because we combined several traits at once: high intelligence, long lifespans, social structures that enable knowledge transmission, language complex enough to discuss abstract concepts, and most importantly, hands with opposable thumbs that can manipulate the environment with extraordinary precision. We could make and use sophisticated tools. We could control fire. We could gradually accumulate knowledge across generations. We could, through the accident of our particular evolutionary history, bootstrap ourselves from stone tools to supercomputers in just a few thousand years. But here is the unsettling implication. If intelligence evolves repeatedly, and if the combination of traits needed for technological civilization is not impossibly rare, then over the vast stretches of deep time, over hundreds of millions of years, might it have happened before? Might some other lineage, in some ancient ecosystem, in some long-vanished environment, have stumbled upon the same combination of traits? Might they have had their own age of fire and tools, their own industrial revolution, their own moment of looking up at the stars and wondering if they were alone? The Cambrian explosion occurred 540 million years ago. The dinosaurs did not appear until the Triassic period, around 230 million years ago. That leaves over 300 million years. 300 million years of complex life, evolving, competing, adapting, experimenting with different body plans and different strategies for survival. 300 million years during which intelligence could have emerged, during which some lineage could have developed the traits needed for technology, during which a civilization could have risen and fallen, leaving almost no trace that we would recognize today. And before the Cambrian, during the Ediacaran, there were another 60 million years of complex multicellular life, experimenting with body plans we can barely imagine. Who knows what was possible during that strange time, in those alien oceans, under that different sky? The question is not whether intelligence could have evolved before the dinosaurs. Intelligence clearly can evolve, and does so repeatedly. The question is whether any of those ancient intelligences ever crossed the threshold into technological civilization, and if they did, whether they left any evidence behind that we might, with careful examination, still discover today. In 2018, two scientists posed a question that would spark intense debate in fields ranging from geology to astrobiology. Adam Frank, an astrophysicist at the University of Rochester, and Gavin Schmidt, the director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, published a paper titled The Silurian Hypothesis in the International Journal of Astrobiology. The title referenced a joke from the British science fiction series Doctor Who, in which an intelligent reptilian species called Silurians supposedly evolved on Earth millions of years before humans. But the science behind the joke was deadly serious. Their question was elegant in its simplicity. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, what geological traces would it leave behind, and would we be able to detect them? They were not claiming that such a civilization did exist. They were not presenting evidence that it had. They were asking a more fundamental question. If it had existed, could we even know about it? And their answer was deeply unsettling. The Silurian hypothesis forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the geological record. It is far more fragile and incomplete than most people realize. The Earth is not a library that carefully preserves all records of the past. It is a recycling plant, constantly destroying old material and creating new, grinding civilizations to dust, and then pulverizing the dust itself until nothing recognizable remains. Consider what will happen to our current civilization. Our cities cover less than 1% of Earth's land surface. Much of our infrastructure is concentrated in coastal areas, which are among the most geologically unstable regions, subject to rising and falling sea levels, erosion, and sedimentation. Most human-made materials degrade relatively quickly on geological timescales. Wood rots, paper disintegrates, even stone weathers and crumbles. The Great Pyramid of Giza, one of humanity's most enduring monuments, is less than 5,000 years old and already shows significant erosion. Over millions of years, it would be reduced to a slightly odd distribution of limestone fragments, easily mistaken for natural geological variation. Metal artifacts fare no better. Iron oxidizes into rust, which weathers away into sediment indistinguishable from natural iron-rich deposits. Aluminum, copper, and other metals corrode or form compounds that can easily be mistaken for natural mineral deposits. Even substances we think of as nearly indestructible, like glass or ceramics, will shatter, fracture, and weather into unrecognizable fragments over geological time. The fossil record shows us just how incomplete our evidence from the past really is. Paleontologists estimate that far less than 1% of all species that ever lived have been discovered as fossils. The process of fossilization requires specific conditions: rapid burial, the right chemistry in the surrounding sediment, lack of scavengers or bacteria that would destroy the body, and then the extraordinary luck of that fossil surviving millions of years of geological processes before being exposed by erosion at just the right time and place for a paleontologist to find it before it erodes away. Now, consider that human bodies, and presumably the bodies of any intelligent civilization, are among the least likely to fossilize. We are large animals with relatively low population densities compared to other species. We tend to die in places where our bodies will be scavenged, burned, or buried in ways that prevent fossilization. Even when individuals are preserved, like the famous hominid fossils that trace our evolution, they represent almost unbelievably rare circumstances. The entire human fossil record, everything we know about our origins, is based on perhaps a few thousand individuals out of tens of billions who lived and died over millions of years. Frank and Schmidt calculated that even if an industrial civilization lasting a few hundred years had existed as recently as 50 million years ago, which is recent in geological terms, its direct physical artifacts would have almost completely vanished. Buildings would be gone, tools would be gone, bones would be extraordinarily rare at best. Cities would have eroded away completely, their locations marked, if at all, by subtle chemical anomalies in sedimentary layers. So, if direct physical evidence would vanish, what might remain? This is where the Silurian hypothesis becomes truly interesting, because the answer is chemical signatures. An industrial civilization, even a relatively brief one, would alter the chemistry of the planet in ways that might persist in the geological record for millions of years. Consider what our civilization is doing to Earth's chemistry right now. We are burning fossil fuels, releasing carbon dioxide that has been locked underground for hundreds of millions of years. This is changing the ratio of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere, oceans, and living things. We are creating plastics, novel compounds that have never existed in nature, that break down into microplastics that are now found in every ocean and spreading through the food chain. We are mining and concentrating rare earth elements, creating unusual distributions of metals that would look anomalous in future geological layers. We are producing synthetic chemicals, radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing, and persistent organic pollutants that will leave traces for thousands or even millions of years. We are also causing a mass extinction event. Species are going extinct at rates hundreds or thousands of times higher than the background extinction rate. This will show up in the fossil record as a sudden loss of diversity, a boundary layer that marks a catastrophic event. And we are changing nutrient cycles, altering the chemistry of soils and oceans in ways that will affect sedimentation patterns and the chemical composition of rocks formed from our time period. All of these signatures, Frank and Schmidt argued, would be compressed into a thin geological layer, perhaps only a few centimeters or millimeters thick when compressed by millions of years of overlying sediment. This layer would show chemical anomalies, unusual isotope ratios, concentrations of rare elements, evidence of rapid climate change, signatures of mass extinction. To a geologist millions of years from now, unaware of our existence, this layer might look like evidence of a massive volcanic event, or an asteroid impact, or some other natural catastrophe. They might never realize it marked the existence of a technological civilization unless they were specifically looking for that explanation. Now, here is where the hypothesis becomes provocative. Do any such anomalous layers exist in the geological record from before the dinosaurs? Are there mysterious chemical signatures, unexplained extinction events, or strange concentration of elements that we have been interpreting as natural phenomena, but which might possibly indicate something else? The answer, it turns out, is yes, several times over. Earth's history is punctuated by events that leave us scratching our heads, by phenomena that do not quite fit our models, by chemical signatures that seem to indicate something unusual happened, but we cannot quite determine what. Let us examine a few of the most intriguing cases. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, occurring approximately 56 million years ago, saw global temperatures spike by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius in just a few thousand years. Massive amounts of carbon were released into the atmosphere, acidifying oceans and causing significant extinctions. The source of all this carbon remains debated. Most scientists favor natural explanations, like massive volcanic activity, or the release of methane from warming ocean sediments. But the rapidity of the change and some unusual chemical signatures have caused a few researchers to wonder if there might be additional factors we are not considering. Going back further to the Permian-Triassic boundary around 252 million years ago, we find the largest mass extinction event in Earth's history, sometimes called the Great Dying. Approximately 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial species went extinct. The leading theory involves massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia, releasing enormous amounts of greenhouse gases, triggering runaway climate change, ocean anoxia, and ecosystem collapse. But some aspects of this event remain poorly understood. The extinction occurred in multiple pulses. Some groups of organisms were affected differently than we would expect. Certain chemical signatures do not quite match what our models predict. Most scientists are satisfied with volcanic explanations, but a few questions linger. Even more intriguing is the Cambrian explosion itself. That sudden diversification of life forms around 540 million years ago. While mainstream science attributes this to a combination of rising oxygen levels, evolution of key developmental genes, and ecological feedback loops, the sheer rapidity of the diversification continues to puzzle researchers. Some have proposed more exotic explanations, though these remain firmly in the minority and are not generally accepted. Frank and Schmidt were careful to note that they were not claiming any of these events were caused by ancient civilizations. They were simply pointing out that if an ancient industrial civilization had existed, its traces might look similar to certain natural events, and we might not be able to tell the difference without very careful analysis, if at all. They also noted that the longer ago an event occurred, the harder it becomes to detect and interpret. The rock record becomes more fragmentary. Geological processes have more time to alter and obscure evidence. And critically, the rarer an event, the less likely we are to have evidence from it, preserved in the thin slice of time and space we have managed to study. Think about it this way. Humans have existed as an industrial species for less than 200 years. The dinosaurs ruled Earth for 165 million years, almost 1 million times longer. Yet we have found tens of thousands of dinosaur fossils. How many traces of a 200-year industrial civilization should we expect to find if it existed 300 million years ago? The mathematics are sobering. Even if dozens of such civilizations rose and fell in pre-dinosaur times, each lasting hundreds or thousands of years, the probability of finding definitive evidence from any single one might be extremely low. This is the core insight of the Silurian hypothesis. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially across deep time. We should not expect to find evidence of ancient civilizations in the same way we find dinosaur fossils, because the nature of technological artifacts and the nature of fossilization are fundamentally mismatched. If ancient civilizations existed, we would need to search for them in entirely different ways, looking at broader patterns rather than individual artifacts, at chemical anomalies rather than bones, at statistical oddities in the geological record rather than smoking gun discoveries. The hypothesis does not prove anything. It does not even strongly suggest anything. What it does do is force us to confront the limits of our knowledge and the possibility that Earth's deep history might contain chapters we have not yet learned to read. It asks us to remain humble about our understanding of the past and open to possibilities we might have dismissed too quickly. It reminds us that in deep time, civilizations can rise and fall and be forgotten so completely that even their existence becomes questionable. And perhaps most importantly, it gives us a framework for thinking about our own civilization's legacy. If we disappeared tomorrow, what would remain? What traces would last long enough to be found by whatever intelligence arises next? Whether in a few million years or a few hundred million, the answers might humble us. If we accept the possibility that evidence of ancient civilizations might exist but be extraordinarily difficult to detect, the natural next question becomes, have we found anything unusual? Are there patterns in the geological record, chemical anomalies, or strange formations that resist easy explanation and might, with the right interpretation, hint at something more than natural processes? The answer is a complicated yes, though we must be extremely careful about interpretation. Science is built on the principle of parsimony. When multiple explanations are possible, we should favor the simplest one that fits the known facts. Natural explanations should always be preferred unless evidence conclusively rules them out. But with that important caveat in mind, let us examine some of the more intriguing anomalies that have puzzled researchers over the years. First, we must discuss the problem of the Ediacaran fauna themselves. These strange organisms, appearing around 600 million years ago and largely vanishing around 540 million years ago, represent one of the most mysterious chapters in the history of life. Most Ediacaran organisms look nothing like modern animals. They often display fractal geometry, with the same patterns repeating at different scales. Some paleontologists have suggested they might have used a fundamentally different architecture than modern animals, perhaps having no true organs, no left-right symmetry, no obvious way of feeding or reproducing that matches any modern organism. One researcher, paleontologist Adolf Seilacher, proposed that Ediacaran organisms might have been a completely separate experiment in multicellular life, unrelated to modern animals, perhaps photosynthetic or absorbing nutrients through their entire surface area like giant bacteria. Most were sessile, attached to the seafloor or lying on it. Many show a quilted pattern that does not match any known biological structure. And then, around the time of the Cambrian explosion, most of them vanished, replaced by recognizably animal-like creatures with eyes, mouths, and appendages. Now, mainstream science has developed reasonable explanations for Ediacaran organisms. They were probably early animals experimenting with different body plans in an ocean with low oxygen and few predators, conditions that would later change and lead to their extinction. But their strangeness continues to provoke speculation. A few researchers have wondered if some Ediacaran formations might not be fossils at all, but something else. Something we are misinterpreting because we assume all large structures and ancient rocks must be biological in origin. Most scientists dismiss this idea, but it lingers at the edges of paleontology. Moving forward in time, we encounter another mystery in the fossil record of the Devonian period, roughly 400 million years ago. This was the age of fishes, when vertebrates first began to dominate marine ecosystems. It was also when plants and animals first colonized land in earnest, creating the first forests and terrestrial ecosystems. The Devonian ended with a series of extinction events, the causes of which remain debated. But scattered throughout Devonian rocks are occasional formations that have puzzled geologists. One example is the mysterious grooves and channels found in certain Devonian rock formations, particularly in areas that were once shallow seas. These channels show patterns that look organized, almost geometrical, running in parallel lines or forming grid-like patterns. Mainstream geology attributes these to sediment flows, underwater currents, or the action of ancient glaciers. But a few geologists have noted that some of these patterns seem oddly regular, more regular than typical geological processes would produce. They are almost certainly natural formations, but they push the boundaries of what we expect from random geological processes. Then there are the strange metal spheres occasionally found in Precambrian rocks, particularly in South Africa. These spheres, some perfectly spherical or nearly so, are embedded in rock formations over 2 billion years old. They are made primarily of pyrite and other minerals and range in size from a few millimeters to several centimeters. Geological consensus is that these are mineral concretions, formed when minerals precipitate out of water within sediments, creating roughly spherical structures through chemical processes. This is a well-understood phenomenon, but a few of these spheres show unusual features. Perfectly parallel grooves running around their equators, such precise sphericity that it seems to defy natural formation. Occasional internal structures that look almost engineered. The vast majority of scientists studying these spheres are satisfied with the mineral concretion explanation, and indeed, most of these spheres do appear to be natural. But there remains a small subset, perhaps a dozen or so out of thousands examined, that show features unusual enough that they have appeared in footnotes of geological papers as curiosities. No one seriously proposes they are artificial, but they remain anomalies, data points that do not quite fit our expectations. Another anomaly comes from studying the chemistry of ancient rocks. Certain elements, particularly rare earth elements, show distribution patterns in some geological layers that seem unusual. Rare earth elements like neodymium, europium, and ytterbium are useful tracers in geology because they resist weathering and maintain their ratios over time, allowing geologists to reconstruct ancient conditions. But in a few locations, in rocks dating to various periods before the dinosaurs, these ratios appear anomalous, not matching what we would expect from known geological processes. In most cases, further study reveals an explanation: unusual volcanic activity, unique local conditions, or simply measurement error. But occasionally, an anomaly persists. One example is a thin layer found in certain Ordovician rocks, around 450 million years old, that shows an unusual spike in platinum group elements. These elements are rare in Earth's crust, but more common in asteroids, so their presence usually indicates an impact event. But this particular layer shows platinum enrichment without other clear impact signatures like shocked quartz or iridium anomalies. It is probably still related to extraterrestrial material, perhaps a large meteor that broke up in the atmosphere, but it does not fit standard patterns. Now, why do I mention these geological curiosities? Because they illustrate an important point. The geological record is full of oddities, of formations and chemical signatures that do not quite match our expectations, that require special explanations or remain puzzling even after study. Most of these are natural phenomena that we simply do not fully understand yet. Geology is an incomplete science dealing with incomplete evidence. But this also means that if evidence of ancient civilizations did exist, it might hide among these other anomalies, dismissed as yet another geological curiosity. The Silurian hypothesis suggests we should look for patterns rather than artifacts, for chemical signatures rather than structures. And when we do that, some intriguing possibilities emerge, though we must be cautious about interpretation. One of the most discussed potential signatures is the carbon isotope record. Carbon exists in several isotopes, with carbon-12 and carbon-13 being the most common stable forms. Living organisms preferentially use carbon-12 in their metabolic processes, which means organic material, including fossil fuels, is depleted in carbon-13 relative to the background. When we burn fossil fuels, we release this carbon-12 enriched carbon into the atmosphere, which then gets absorbed by the oceans and living things, creating a detectable shift in the carbon isotope ratio. This is precisely what we see happening today. The ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13 in the atmosphere is shifting as we burn coal, oil, and natural gas. This shift will be preserved in geological layers forming right now, in the carbonate shells of marine organisms, in the wood of trees, in any material that incorporates atmospheric carbon. Millions of years from now, if geologists study rocks from our time, they will see this isotope excursion and might wonder what caused it. The intriguing thing is that similar carbon isotope excursions appear throughout Earth's history. Many have clear natural explanations: massive volcanic eruptions releasing carbon from deep within the Earth, methane releases from warming ocean sediments, changes in ocean circulation patterns affecting how carbon is cycled between the atmosphere and deep ocean. But some remain puzzling, showing patterns that do not quite match what we expect from known processes. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, which I mentioned earlier, shows such an excursion. The carbon released during this event was strongly depleted in carbon-13, indicating it came from organic sources. Most scientists favor methane release from ocean sediments or massive peat bog burning as explanations. But the rapidity of the carbon release, occurring over perhaps only a few thousand years, remains difficult to explain with current models. It would require an enormous amount of methane to be released almost simultaneously across the global ocean, a process we struggle to model convincingly. Could this have been an ancient industrial civilization burning fossil fuels? Almost certainly not. The event occurred too long ago, just 56 million years, which is actually relatively recent in geological terms, and the amount of carbon released was far greater than any industrial civilization lasting a few hundred or even a few thousand years could have produced. But it illustrates the principle. If a brief industrial period had occurred in deep time, its signature might look similar to certain natural events, making it extremely difficult to distinguish. Another potential signature comes from examining extinction patterns. Mass extinctions occur throughout Earth's history, caused by various natural phenomena. Asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, rapid climate change, ocean circulation collapse. But some extinctions show patterns that are harder to explain. The Permian-Triassic extinction, the worst extinction event in Earth's history, occurred in multiple pulses over perhaps a few 100,000 years. Each pulse eliminated different groups of organisms, suggesting multiple stressors or causes. While mainstream science attributes this to a combination of Siberian volcanism, climate change, ocean anoxia, and potentially an impact event, some details do not fit perfectly. For instance, some terrestrial organisms went extinct before marine organisms, which is unusual for climate-driven extinctions. Some groups that should have been affected showed remarkable resistance, while others that should have been resilient disappeared. The pattern suggests something more complex than a single catastrophic event. Perhaps multiple stressors acting synergistically in ways our models struggle to capture. Again, this is almost certainly natural, but it illustrates how complex the geological record can be, how difficult it is to reconstruct ancient events with certainty, and how a civilization-caused extinction might hide within the noise of natural variability. Let us also consider the question of technological artifacts from a different angle. What if an ancient civilization used biotechnology rather than mechanical technology? What if they engineered organisms rather than building machines? Such modifications would leave almost no trace in the fossil record. We can barely detect genetic manipulation in organisms that lived a few thousand years ago. Across millions of years, the evidence would be completely erased by subsequent evolution and natural selection. Or what if they used materials we have not considered? Modern civilization is built on steel, concrete, plastics, silicon, but these are solutions to problems posed by our particular environment and our particular evolutionary heritage. An aquatic civilization might use entirely different materials. A civilization that evolved in a high oxygen environment might use substances that would quickly oxidize and vanish in our current atmosphere. A civilization with different chemical knowledge might create compounds that degrade rapidly, but were useful for their purposes. The point is not that evidence definitely exists. The point is that we might not recognize evidence even if we were looking directly at it, because we have preconceptions about what civilization looks like, what technology looks like, what artifacts should be. We are searching for our reflection in the deep past, but if intelligence arose there, it might have taken such a different form that our reflection would not recognize us either. There is one more category of anomaly worth discussing: out-of-place artifacts, or OOP arts as they are sometimes called. These are objects that seem to be in the wrong geological context, appearing older than they should be, or showing features that are difficult to explain. I must be absolutely clear here. The vast majority of OOP arts are hoaxes, misidentifications, or have been satisfactorily explained by mainstream science. The creationist movement, in particular, has seized on OOP arts to argue against evolution and an old Earth, which has unfortunately tainted legitimate scientific inquiry into unusual findings. But setting aside the hoaxes and misidentifications, there remain a tiny number of findings that continue to puzzle researchers, not because they prove anything extraordinary, but because they resist easy explanation and remind us that our understanding of the past remains incomplete. For example, there are occasional reports of worked metal objects found in coal seams or ancient rock layers. Almost all of these turn out to be modern objects that accidentally fell into mining excavations or natural mineral formations that superficially resemble worked metal, or hoaxes created by workers looking for attention or money. But very rarely an object is found in context, properly documented, that shows features difficult to explain. I will not claim these are evidence of ancient civilizations. They are not. They are anomalies, likely with prosaic explanations we have not yet discovered. But they serve as reminders that geology, paleontology, and archaeology are incomplete sciences dealing with incomplete data. We should maintain healthy skepticism about extraordinary claims, while also staying open to the possibility that we do not know everything about Earth's history. The challenge with all of these anomalies, all of these curious findings and unexplained patterns, is distinguishing signal from noise. Earth's geological and biological history is incredibly complex, shaped by countless interacting processes over billions of years. Random chance alone will produce some patterns that look organized, some formations that look artificial, some chemical signatures that seem anomalous. The question is whether any true signal of ancient intelligence exists within all this noise, and if it does, whether we have developed the methods to detect it. Science operates on evidence, on reproducible observations, on theories that make testable predictions. This is science's great strength, but it also creates challenges when studying events from deep time. We cannot run controlled experiments on the Cambrian period. We cannot travel back to the Devonian to make direct observations. We are left with fragments of evidence, indirect measurements, and inference from principles we believe are universal. So, what would constitute convincing evidence of an ancient pre-dinosaur civilization? This is not an idle question. Scientists have actually thought carefully about this, particularly researchers in the field of astrobiology, who are concerned with detecting evidence of life on other planets, including potentially extinct alien civilizations. The gold standard would be finding an artifact, a manufactured object, that could not have been produced by any natural process and could not have arrived in its geological context through contamination or hoax. This artifact would need to be made from materials or show construction techniques that definitively indicate intelligence. It would need to be found in situ, in proper geological context, with its age determined through multiple independent dating methods. And ideally, multiple such artifacts would need to be found in similar geological layers across different locations, establishing a pattern rather than a single anomaly. This is an extraordinarily high bar, perhaps impossibly high, given what we know about geological processes and the preservation of artifacts over deep time. As we have discussed, direct physical artifacts are unlikely to survive hundreds of millions of years of geological activity. Even if they did exist, the probability of finding them is vanishingly small given how little of Earth's ancient rock formations we have actually examined in detail. So researchers have proposed looking for statistical signatures instead. Rather than seeking a single definitive artifact, we might look for patterns in the geological record that would be difficult to explain without invoking intelligent activity. This approach has been used successfully in other contexts. For example, geologists can identify ancient river channels even when the rivers disappeared millions of years ago by looking at patterns in sediment distribution and grain size. They can identify ancient impact craters even when the crater itself has been eroded away by examining patterns of shocked minerals and unusual element concentrations. What patterns might indicate ancient industrial activity? One possibility is examining the global distribution of elements that are rare in Earth's crust, but necessary for advanced technology. Industrial civilizations tend to concentrate these elements through mining and manufacturing. They create deposits where rare earth elements, precious metals, or unusual compounds are found in much higher concentrations than natural processes would produce. The challenge is that natural processes can also concentrate elements. Hydrothermal vents create mineral deposits. Certain types of volcanic activity can concentrate specific elements. Evaporating seas leave behind salt deposits mixed with trace minerals, so finding unusual element concentrations is not enough. We would need to find patterns that are difficult to explain through known geological processes, perhaps specific combinations of elements that are useful for technology but not produced together naturally, or distributions that follow patterns suggesting deliberate extraction and processing. Another potential signature is examining the chemistry of atmospheric gases trapped in ancient rocks. Air bubbles can become trapped in minerals as they form, preserving tiny samples of ancient atmospheres. By analyzing these bubbles, scientists have reconstructed how Earth's atmosphere changed over time. An industrial civilization would alter atmospheric chemistry in detectable ways, increasing certain greenhouse gases, producing synthetic compounds, changing isotope ratios of various elements. The problem is that these signals would be extremely faint and easily obscured by natural variations. Earth's atmosphere has changed dramatically over geological time due to biological activity, volcanic outgassing, weathering of rocks, and changes in solar radiation. Distinguishing a brief industrial signal from this natural variability would require examining many samples from precisely dated geological layers and looking for anomalies that appear globally rather than just locally. A third approach involves looking for technosignatures, evidence of specific technologies that would leave unique traces. For example, nuclear fission produces specific isotopes that do not occur naturally in significant quantities. If an ancient civilization had developed nuclear technology, traces of these isotopes might persist in certain geological formations. Similarly, certain types of industrial processes produce distinctive chemical waste products that might be identifiable millions of years later. The challenge here is that we are looking for traces of technologies that we understand, technologies that we have developed. But an ancient civilization might have followed completely different technological paths. They might have discovered solutions to problems that we have not even thought of, or solve familiar problems in unfamiliar ways. We might be looking for nuclear signatures when they use something entirely different for power generation. This is compounded by the problem of what researchers call anthropocentric bias. We tend to assume that other civilizations, if they exist, would be similar to us, would face similar challenges, would develop similar technologies. But this might not be true. Even on Earth, different human cultures, given similar resources and challenges, often developed quite different technological approaches. An octopus civilization, if such a thing could exist, would approach technology completely differently than primates due to their different anatomy, environment, and sensory systems. So, we face a profound epistemological problem. We are searching for evidence of something we can barely imagine, something that might look nothing like what we expect, using methods designed to detect phenomena we understand. It is like trying to find radio signals using only a telescope, or trying to hear music using only your sense of smell. We might be using the wrong tools, looking in the wrong places, asking the wrong questions. Some researchers have proposed a more statistical approach. Instead of looking for specific evidence, we might look at the overall pattern of biological and geological history and ask whether it shows signatures of unusual events or activities. For example, we might examine extinction patterns across Earth's entire history and ask whether any show characteristics that are difficult to explain with known natural processes. We might look at the rate of evolutionary innovation over time and ask whether there are anomalous periods where evolution seemed to accelerate or change direction in unexpected ways. This approach has the advantage of not requiring us to know exactly what we are looking for. We are simply asking whether the historical record shows unexplained patterns that might warrant further investigation. The disadvantage is that such patterns could have many explanations, and distinguishing between them might be impossible with current methods. There is also the question of scale. A civilization lasting only a few hundred years would leave much less evidence than one lasting thousands or millions of years. A civilization confined to a small geographic region would leave less evidence than one that spread globally. A civilization that lived primarily in coastal areas, which are geologically unstable and poorly preserved, would leave less evidence than one that occupied inland plateaus. So even if we found no evidence of ancient civilizations, that would not prove they never existed. It would only prove that if they did exist, they were either brief enough, small enough, or unlucky enough that their traces fell below our detection threshold. Absence of evidence, as the saying goes, is not evidence of absence, especially when dealing with such fragmentary and incomplete records. This brings us to perhaps the most important question. Even if we found something suggestive, how would we convince the scientific community? Science rightly demands extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. The claim that a technological civilization existed hundreds of millions of years ago is about as extraordinary as claims get. It would overturn fundamental assumptions about the uniqueness of human intelligence and require rewriting significant portions of our understanding of Earth's history. For such a claim to be accepted, the evidence would need to be overwhelming. It would need to be reproducible, with multiple independent research teams reaching similar conclusions from different data sets. It would need to survive intense scrutiny and withstand alternative explanations. And it would need to be consistent with other evidence from multiple fields: geology, paleontology, chemistry, physics, biology. This is as it should be. Science progresses through careful accumulation of evidence and rigorous testing of hypotheses. Wild speculation, no matter how interesting, does not advance knowledge. But this also means that even if evidence of ancient civilizations exists, it might be decades or centuries before we develop methods sophisticated enough to detect it and gather data convincing enough to prove it. Perhaps the question is not whether we can find proof of ancient civilizations, but whether we can find suggestive evidence that justifies looking more carefully. If we found chemical anomalies that were difficult to explain, if we found patterns in the extinction record that seemed unusual, if we found formations that resisted interpretation through known geological processes, would that be enough to warrant dedicating more resources to the search? Would it be enough to develop new methods, new instruments, new approaches specifically designed to test the hypothesis of ancient intelligence? These are not just academic questions. The search for ancient civilizations on Earth connects directly to our search for life elsewhere in the universe. If intelligence can arise multiple times on one planet, if civilizations can rise and fall, leaving almost no trace, then the universe might be far richer in life and intelligence than we currently estimate. But it also suggests that most civilizations might be undetectable, that they come and go, leaving little evidence of their existence, that we might be surrounded by the ghosts of dead civilizations without ever knowing it. This realization should humble us. It should remind us that our own civilization, our own moment of intelligence and technology, might be briefer and more fragile than we like to imagine. We like to think of human civilization as permanent, as an inevitable development, as something that once achieved will continue indefinitely into the future. But deep time teaches us a different lesson. It teaches us that nothing is permanent, that everything changes, that even continents themselves rise and fall, merge and split, appear and vanish. If civilizations existed before the dinosaurs and vanished so completely that we debate whether they existed at all, what does that say about our own future? What traces will we leave? What would future geologists, future paleontologists, future intelligences studying Earth hundreds of millions of years from now conclude about us? Would they even know we were here? To truly understand whether pre-dinosaur civilizations are possible, we need to explore a fascinating question. Could intelligence have evolved along completely different pathways than it did in humans? Could there be forms of intelligence so alien to our experience that we would struggle to even recognize them as intelligent? Evolution is often misunderstood as a ladder, with simple organisms on the bottom and humans at the top, the pinnacle of development. But this is fundamentally wrong. Evolution is better understood as a branching bush, with thousands of different paths exploring different solutions to survival. There is no single direction, no inevitable destination, no goal toward which life is striving. There is only adaptation to local conditions, solving immediate problems, surviving long enough to reproduce. Intelligence, in this context, is just one solution among many. It is energetically expensive, requiring large brains that consume enormous amounts of calories. It is developmentally demanding, requiring long childhoods during which offspring must be protected and taught. It is socially complex, requiring sophisticated communication and cultural transmission. For most organisms, in most environments, simpler solutions work perfectly well. Bacteria have thrived for billions of years without anything approaching intelligence. Plants dominate terrestrial ecosystems without nervous systems at all. Insects are arguably the most successful animals on Earth, yet individual insects have minimal cognitive abilities. But when environments are complex, when conditions change rapidly, when problems cannot be solved through simple instinctive behaviors, intelligence becomes valuable. And when intelligence becomes valuable enough, natural selection will discover it, not once but multiple times, through different evolutionary paths, using different neural architectures, creating different forms of cognition. We have already discussed how octopuses, birds, and mammals evolved intelligence independently. But let us go deeper into this question. What other forms might intelligence take? What other evolutionary paths might lead to sophisticated cognition and, potentially, technological capability? Consider the possibility of distributed intelligence. Individual neurons are not intelligent, but networks of neurons create minds. Individual ants are not intelligent, but ant colonies show sophisticated collective behaviors, building complex structures, maintaining temperature and humidity in their nests, farming fungus, herding aphids, even waging organized warfare. Some researchers argue that the colony itself should be considered the intelligent entity, a superorganism with cognitive abilities that emerge from the interaction of many simple individuals. Could such distributed intelligence ever become technological? It seems unlikely with ants, given their small size and limited manipulative abilities. But imagine a different evolutionary path. Suppose a eusocial species, one with a colony structure like ants or bees, evolved larger body size and more sophisticated manipulative appendages. Suppose their colonies became even more integrated, with specialized castes not just for reproduction and defense, but for learning, memory, and innovation. Suppose chemical communication evolved to become as sophisticated as human language, allowing complex ideas to be shared across the colony. Such a civilization would look nothing like ours. There would be no individuals in the sense we understand them. Knowledge would be distributed across the colony, with no single organism holding complete information. Technology might be developed collectively, with different castes contributing different insights, combined through chemical signaling into integrated solutions. Artifacts might be built by thousands of organisms working in coordination, each following simple rules that produce complex results, like termites building their enormous mounds. Would we recognize such a civilization if we encountered its remains? Probably not. Their structures might look like natural formations, products of biological activity rather than intelligence. Their artifacts might be organic, biodegrading completely over time. Their chemical communication signals would leave no trace at all. If such a civilization had existed 300 million years ago, we might classify their remains as particularly sophisticated insect nests, never suspecting that intelligence dwelt there, or consider aquatic intelligence. We tend to assume that technological civilization requires living on land, requires the ability to create and control fire, requires access to metal ores and other materials difficult to obtain underwater. But this might be anthropocentric bias. An aquatic civilization might develop technologies based on different principles: hydrokinetic power instead of combustion, ceramic materials made from fired volcanic clay in geothermal vents, construction using principles we have not considered. Cetaceans, whales, and dolphins have large complex brains and sophisticated social behaviors. Their communication includes elements that might be proto-linguistic. Some species show cultural transmission of knowledge, teaching their offspring specialized hunting techniques or songs. They might possess forms of intelligence quite different from ours, focused on echolocation, three-dimensional navigation, and acoustic manipulation, rather than visual spatial reasoning and tool use. Now, imagine an alternate history. Suppose 60 million years ago, after the dinosaurs went extinct, but before mammals had fully diversified, a group of early aquatic mammals evolved in a different direction. Suppose they developed not just intelligence but manipulative appendages, perhaps modified flippers with flexible digits, suitable for grasping and manipulating objects. Suppose they discovered techniques for working with materials underwater, perhaps using volcanic heat to forge tools from the abundant manganese nodules found in the deep ocean. Such a civilization would leave almost no trace. Everything they built would be on the seafloor, where tectonic activity would subduct it back into the mantle over millions of years. Anything organic would decompose completely. Their only signatures might be unusual patterns of element extraction from deep-sea mining, and perhaps anomalous chemical traces in certain sediment layers. We would likely never find evidence of their existence, But let us imagine even more exotic possibilities. What if intelligence could evolve in organisms without centralized nervous systems? Slime molds, despite being single-celled organisms that sometimes cluster into multicellular forms, can solve mazes, anticipate periodic events, and seemingly make decisions. They do this through chemical signaling and network dynamics, without anything resembling a brain. Current research suggests they might possess a form of memory, encoding information in the patterns of their cytoplasm. Could something like a slime mold evolve greater sophistication? Could distributed information processing, spread across a network without centralized control, become conscious and intelligent? This seems far-fetched, but a few researchers have seriously proposed that consciousness might not require neurons at all, that it might emerge from any sufficiently complex information processing system, regardless of substrate. If such intelligence existed, we would have absolutely no way to detect it in the fossil record. It would leave no bones, no shells, no hard parts to fossilize. It might leave chemical traces, but we would likely interpret those as signs of microbial activity. Such organisms might even still exist today, possessing forms of intelligence so alien to our nervous system-based cognition that we cannot recognize or communicate with them. Then there is the possibility of intelligence in forms we have not considered at all. Life on Earth is built from a specific set of molecules: DNA for genetics, proteins for structure and catalysis, lipids for membranes. But theoretical biology suggests other possibilities. Silicon-based life, though difficult to imagine in practice, is chemically possible. Life in exotic solvents like liquid methane or sulfuric acid has been seriously proposed for conditions on other planets. Life that uses different genetic systems or alternative metabolic pathways might exist in extreme environments we have barely explored. If such exotic life existed in Earth's past, during periods when conditions were very different from today, we might have no way to recognize its fossils. We might be looking at them and classifying them as mineral formations, never suspecting they were once alive. And if such life became intelligent and technological, its artifacts would be completely beyond our current ability to interpret. This raises a philosophical question. What is the minimum we would need to observe to conclude that intelligence was present? If we found structures that showed order but could have natural explanations, would that be enough? If we found patterns that suggested purpose but could be produced by non-intelligent processes, would we accept them as evidence? If we found formations that looked technological to us but were made from materials we did not understand through processes we had not imagined, would we even recognize them as artificial? The answer is probably no in most cases. Science demands parsimony, the simplest explanation that fits the facts. As long as a natural explanation is possible, even if complex or unlikely, it will be preferred over proposing intelligence. This is methodologically sound. It prevents us from seeing design where only accident exists, from attributing agency where only mechanism operates. But it also means that weak evidence of intelligence will always be dismissed, even if that intelligence truly existed. Perhaps this is unavoidable. Perhaps the only convincing evidence of intelligence is intelligence that closely resembles our own, that builds in ways we understand, that uses materials we recognize, that leaves traces we can interpret. Perhaps alien intelligence, whether from other planets or other times, will always remain invisible to us unless it specifically tries to make itself known. But this leads to an intriguing speculation. If ancient civilizations did exist, might they have anticipated this problem? Might they have tried to leave messages, markers, something that would survive the grinding of geological ages and announce their existence to whatever intelligence arose after them? How would you create a marker that would last hundreds of millions of years? How would you encode a message that could be decoded by minds that might think entirely differently from your own? These questions have been seriously considered by scientists designing warnings for nuclear waste repositories, which must remain understandable for 10,000 years, a tiny fraction of geological time. They have concluded that it is extraordinarily difficult, perhaps impossible, to create markers that will definitely be recognized and correctly interpreted over such timescales. Languages change, symbols lose meaning, contexts shift. Even obvious warnings might be misinterpreted by future cultures with different assumptions and knowledge. Extend that problem to hundreds of millions of years, across species, across fundamentally different forms of cognition, and the challenge becomes possibly insurmountable. An ancient civilization might have left messages we simply cannot read, markers we cannot recognize, warnings or greetings encoded in formats our minds are not equipped to process. Or perhaps they left no messages at all. Perhaps they lived, flourished briefly, then vanished, returning to the dust from which they came, never imagining that millions of years later, another intelligence would arise and wonder if anyone had come before. The diversity of possible evolutionary paths toward intelligence suggests something profound. If intelligence emerged on Earth before humans, it might have been so fundamentally different from human intelligence that we share no common ground for recognition. We might be looking for ourselves in the deep past when we should be looking for something utterly alien. And if we cannot recognize alien intelligence in our own planet's history, what hope do we have of recognizing it elsewhere in the universe? Let us shift our perspective now from the qualitative to the quantitative. Let us examine the mathematics underlying extinction, recovery, and the possibility of repeated intelligent civilizations arising on a single planet. Because if we are serious about evaluating whether ancient civilizations could have existed, we need to understand not just whether they are possible, but whether they are probable. Earth has experienced 5 major mass extinction events, the so-called Big Five, as well as numerous smaller extinction pulses. These events have shaped the history of life profoundly, eliminating dominant groups and creating opportunities for new forms to evolve. Each extinction represents both an ending and a beginning, a catastrophe and a liberation. The most severe was the Permian-Triassic extinction, approximately 252 million years ago. As mentioned earlier, 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial species went extinct. The oceans became acidic and oxygen depleted. Global temperatures soared by 10 to 14 degrees Celsius. Ecosystems collapsed across the planet. It took millions of years for biodiversity to recover to pre-extinction levels, but recover it did. Life proved remarkably resilient. Survivors radiated into empty ecological niches, evolving new forms, new strategies, new solutions to ancient problems. Within 10 million years, the Triassic period was teeming with diverse life forms, including the first dinosaurs, the first mammals, the first flying reptiles. The slate had been wiped nearly clean, but life had written itself back across it. This pattern repeats throughout Earth's history. Every extinction, no matter how severe, is followed by recovery and diversification. Life has never been completely eradicated, even during the worst catastrophes. As long as some organisms survive, evolution continues, complexity reemerges, and the biosphere rebuilds itself. Now, consider what this means for the possibility of repeated intelligent civilizations. If intelligence can evolve, and if extinction events periodically reset the evolutionary clock, then each recovery period represents a new opportunity for intelligence to emerge. Over hundreds of millions of years, over multiple extinction and recovery cycles, the probability of intelligence emerging multiple times might actually be quite high. Let us work through a simplified calculation. This is not rigorous science, but a thought experiment to illustrate the principle. Suppose that given suitable conditions, complex life, ecosystem stability, and sufficient time, evolution has perhaps a 1% chance per 10 million years of producing a species with human-level or greater intelligence. This is a completely made-up number, chosen for illustration, but it is not absurdly low, given that intelligence has actually evolved multiple times on Earth. Earth has had complex multicellular life for approximately 600 million years. That is 60 10 million year periods. With a 1% chance per period, the probability of at least one intelligent species emerging is approximately 45%. Not certain, but not unlikely either. But this assumes a single continuous period of evolution. In reality, Earth's history is punctuated by extinctions that reset development. After a major extinction, it takes millions of years for ecosystems to recover before conditions are suitable for complex cognition to evolve. So, we have multiple separate chances, multiple rolls of the dice. Even accounting for recovery times, Earth has experienced perhaps 10 to 20 periods since the Cambrian, where conditions were stable enough and ecosystems were complex enough for intelligence to potentially evolve. If each period had even a small independent chance, the cumulative probability becomes significant. Again, these numbers are speculative. We do not know the actual probability of intelligence emerging. It might be much higher or much lower than 1% per 10 million years. But the principle remains. Over deep time, even unlikely events become probable, and intelligence, based on its repeated independent evolution in modern species, does not appear to be extraordinarily unlikely. Now consider the flip side, extinction. How long does a species, particularly an intelligent species, typically survive before going extinct? For most species, the answer is surprisingly short on geological timescales. The average species lifetime is perhaps 1 to 10 million years for vertebrates, though some taxa are much more stable. Mammals as a group have high turnover rates, with many species lasting less than 1 million years. Intelligent species might have even shorter lifespans. Intelligence creates instability. It allows rapid adaptation but also rapid environmental modification. Intelligent species can alter their environment more quickly than evolution can adapt them to those changes. They can create tools that allow exploitation of resources beyond sustainable levels. They can develop social structures that lead to conflict and warfare. They can, as we are currently demonstrating, alter global climate and ecosystems in ways that threaten their own survival. If we assume an intelligent technological civilization might last, on average, only 10,000 to 100,000 years before either going extinct or evolving into something different, then even if such civilizations arose multiple times, they would represent only brief flickers in deep time, separated by millions of years, each leaving minimal trace of their existence. Let us return to our simplified calculation. Suppose intelligence has arisen 20 times in the last 600 million years. Suppose each resulting civilization lasted an average of 50,000 years before extinction. That is a total of 1 million years of intelligent civilization out of 600 million years of complex life, or approximately 0.17% of the time. During the other 99.83% of Earth's history, no technological civilization existed. What are the chances we would find evidence of any of those 20 civilizations? It depends on many factors: how advanced they became, where they lived, what materials they used, how geological processes affected their remains. But given everything we know about fossilization, erosion, and the incompleteness of the geological record, the chances might be extremely low for any individual civilization, and still quite low, even considering all of them together. Now, you might object that 20 intelligent civilizations in 600 million years seems absurdly high. Perhaps it is. But consider, if intelligence is not absurdly improbable, if it emerges when conditions are right, then over such vast timescales, multiple emergence becomes not just possible, but likely. The question is not whether it is possible, but whether conditions have been right often enough and long enough for intelligence to emerge and establish itself. And here we must confront an uncomfortable truth. We have no idea how to calculate these probabilities accurately. We have exactly one data point: ourselves. We know intelligence arose at least once on Earth, in humans, relatively recently. We know it has arisen in more limited forms in multiple other lineages, but we do not know what the underlying probability is, what conditions are necessary, what factors make it more or less likely. This is sometimes called the problem of sample size 1. When you only have one example, you cannot distinguish between things that are common and things that are incredibly rare but happened once by chance. If you flip a coin once and it comes up heads, you cannot conclude that it is a fair coin. It might be double-headed. It might be weighted. You simply do not have enough information. Similarly, from the existence of human intelligence alone, we cannot conclude whether intelligence is common or rare in the universe, whether it arises frequently or almost never, whether we are typical or extraordinarily unusual. We need more data points, either by finding other intelligent species on Earth, or by detecting them elsewhere in the universe, or by discovering evidence of past intelligent species. This brings us back to the question of ancient civilizations. If we could establish that intelligence arose multiple times on Earth, independently, that would be an extraordinarily important data point. It would suggest intelligence is relatively common, that given suitable conditions and sufficient time, evolution reliably discovers it. It would change our estimates of how common intelligence might be in the universe, and how optimistic we should be about finding it. Conversely, if we could establish with confidence that intelligence has only arisen once on Earth, in humans, despite 600 million years of complex life and multiple extinction and recovery cycles, that would also be important information. It would suggest intelligence is rare, that the combination of conditions necessary is achieved infrequently, that we might be unusually alone. The problem is that we cannot establish either conclusion with current evidence. We have not found definitive proof of ancient civilizations, but we have also not surveyed enough of the geological record, developed sensitive enough detection methods, or thought carefully enough about what evidence might look like to conclusively rule them out. The mathematics of extinction and recovery tell us that deep time provides many opportunities for intelligence to emerge. The incompleteness of the geological record tells us that evidence from those opportunities, if they were realized, would be extraordinarily difficult to detect. We are left in a position of profound uncertainty, unable to confirm or deny with confidence. Perhaps the most important implication of these mathematical considerations is humility. We should not assume that humanity is unique, that our moment in time is special, that intelligence could only arise once in Earth's long history. But we also should not jump to conclusions without evidence, should not see patterns where only noise exists, should not let speculation substitute for careful investigation. The mathematics remind us that unlikely things become likely given enough time, that rare events occur repeatedly given enough opportunities, that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence when the evidence would be extraordinarily difficult to detect, even if it existed. These are not reasons to believe ancient civilizations existed. They are reasons to remain open to the possibility and to continue searching for better evidence and better methods of detection. Whether or not ancient civilizations existed before the dinosaurs, contemplating the possibility forces us to confront unsettling questions about our own future. If intelligence has arisen before and vanished so completely that we can barely detect its passage, what does that say about the permanence of human civilization? What traces will we leave? What would future intelligences, arising millions of years after humanity has disappeared, conclude about us? These are not idle questions. They cut to the heart of how we think about our place in the cosmic story, about the meaning and purpose of civilization, about what we owe to the future. Consider first the question of our legacy. Humans have existed as a distinct species for approximately 300,000 years. Civilization, defined as settled agricultural societies with writing and complex social organization, has existed for only about 10,000 years. Industrial civilization, with fossil fuels and global technology, has existed for less than 300 years. In geological terms, we are extraordinarily young, our entire history compressed into a moment so brief it would barely register in the rock record. Yet, in that brief moment, we have transformed the planet. We have altered atmospheric composition, raising carbon dioxide levels to heights not seen for millions of years. We have driven species extinct at rates comparable to major mass extinctions of the past. We have scattered microplastics throughout the oceans and persistent organic pollutants across every ecosystem. We have detonated nuclear weapons, spreading artificial radioisotopes that will decay over thousands of years. We have modified landscapes, redirected rivers, built structures visible from space. All of these modifications will leave traces in the geological record. Future geologists will find a boundary layer marking our time, showing chemical anomalies, shifts in isotope ratios, evidence of mass extinction, unusual concentrations of elements. They will know something significant happened. Whether they will correctly interpret that something as intelligent industrial civilization depends on how carefully they look and what assumptions they bring to their investigation. But most of what we consider important about human civilization will vanish. Our buildings will crumble, our monuments will erode, our books will decay. Our digital records will become inaccessible as storage media degrade and file formats become obsolete. Within thousands of years, most physical traces of our cities will be gone. Within millions of years, even the chemical traces will be difficult to detect. Within tens of millions of years, most evidence will have been recycled by plate tectonics, eroded by weathering, or buried so deeply it becomes inaccessible. What does this mean for the significance of human achievement? If all we build and create and discover will eventually vanish, does anything we do matter in the long term? This is an ancient philosophical question, given new urgency by contemplating deep time, and the answer depends on what we mean by mattering. In terms of permanent physical legacy, perhaps nothing we do matters on timescales of hundreds of millions of years. The universe will continue regardless of human existence or extinction. Earth will continue its geological processes. Life, if any survives us, will evolve and diversify. In the truly long term, on cosmic scales, even Earth itself will be destroyed when our sun expands into a red giant in about 5 billion years. On those timescales, nothing on Earth is permanent. But perhaps permanence is not the right criterion for significance. Perhaps what matters is the experience of consciousness, the moment-to-moment reality of being alive and aware. Perhaps what matters is reducing suffering and increasing flourishing for the beings that exist now, in this brief moment of time that is all any of us will ever experience. Perhaps what matters is the relationships we form, the beauty we create, the understanding we achieve, even if all of it is temporary. There is another perspective to consider as well. If humanity survives long enough and becomes advanced enough, we might eventually seed other worlds with life, spread intelligence throughout the galaxy, establish civilizations that outlast Earth itself. In that scenario, what we do now, in this critical formative period of our species, could have consequences echoing across millions or billions of years. The decisions we make today about our values, our technologies, our relationship with our environment could shape the entire future of intelligence in our region of the universe. This is the optimistic view, the aspiration that drives much of space exploration and long-term thinking, but it requires that we survive our current challenges. Climate change, nuclear weapons, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, social instability, and survival is not guaranteed. History shows us that civilizations, even powerful and sophisticated ones, can collapse. Easter Island, the Maya, the Roman Empire, countless others rose to impressive heights and then fell, unable to maintain the complexity they had achieved. Could human civilization collapse completely? Could we not just decline, but vanish, leaving future generations, if any survive, to rebuild from a much lower technological level? Many researchers who study civilizational collapse believe the answer is yes. Modern civilization is extraordinarily complex, relying on global supply chains, intricate infrastructure, and specialized knowledge distributed across billions of individuals. Disrupt these systems sufficiently, and they might not recover. The knowledge might be lost, the resources might be depleted, the survivors might lack the tools and understanding to rebuild. If human civilization collapsed today, and most technology was lost, could we rebuild to our current level? Perhaps. If ancient civilizations existed on Earth and vanished, they passed through some filter that we have not yet faced. Perhaps they collapsed through their own actions. Perhaps they were destroyed by external catastrophes. Perhaps they evolved into something we would not recognize as civilization. Their absence from the modern world suggests that permanence, at least on geological timescales, is difficult or impossible to achieve. This should not lead to despair. It should lead to wisdom. If civilizations are temporary, then we should make the most of the time we have. If our impact will fade, then we should focus on what matters in the present. If we might fail and fall like those who may have come before, then we should learn whatever lessons we can, avoid whatever mistakes we can identify, and build whatever resilience we can achieve. There is also a strange comfort in the possibility of ancient civilizations. If intelligence has arisen before, if civilizations have flourished and fallen, and the world has continued, then perhaps failure is not final. Perhaps it is just part of a larger cycle, like the cycles of growth and decay in a forest, where individual trees fall but the forest endures. Perhaps what matters is not the permanence of any individual civilization, but the ongoing experiment of intelligence, consciousness, and complexity in the universe. Or Perhaps what matters is something we cannot yet imagine, some perspective or value or purpose that only becomes apparent to civilizations far more advanced or far older than ours. Perhaps the meaning of existence is not something we can determine from our current limited viewpoint, any more than an ancient civilization, if it existed, could have predicted or imagined us. What we can do is make our choices with awareness. We can recognize that we live in deep time, that our moment is brief, that nothing is guaranteed. We can act with humility, knowing that we are not the first to face challenges and may not be the last. We can try to leave the world better than we found it, even if better means simply preserving the possibility for future intelligence to arise and ask these same questions. And we can keep searching, keep investigating, keep trying to understand our past and our place in the story of this remarkable living planet. Because whether or not ancient civilizations existed, the question itself is valuable. It expands our perspective, challenges our assumptions, and reminds us that we are part of something much larger and older than ourselves. So, where do we stand today in the search for evidence of ancient pre-dinosaur civilizations? What is actually being done to investigate this question? And what might future research uncover? The truth is that very little direct research is being conducted specifically to search for ancient civilizations. This is not a mainstream scientific question. It is not funded by major grants. It does not have dedicated research teams or specialized equipment. Most scientists consider it too speculative, too unlikely to yield results, too far outside conventional paradigms to warrant serious investigation. But that is beginning to change, slowly. The publication of the Silurian hypothesis brought the question into scientific discourse in a way that makes it harder to dismiss. Researchers in astrobiology, as they develop methods for detecting life on other planets, including extinct life, are implicitly developing methods that could be applied to searching for ancient civilizations on Earth. And a few maverick researchers, willing to work on questions their colleagues consider fringe, are beginning to look at the geological record with new eyes. One area of active research involves refining our understanding of chemical signatures that industrial activity might leave. Researchers are creating detailed models of how various pollutants, synthetic compounds, and isotope anomalies would be preserved, altered, and potentially detected in ancient rocks. This work is valuable even if no ancient civilizations existed, because it helps us understand what traces our own civilization will leave and informs our search for life elsewhere. Another area involves developing better techniques for analyzing ancient rocks at microscopic and chemical levels. New instruments can detect smaller concentrations of elements, more subtle chemical patterns, finer structures in mineral crystals. As these techniques improve, we might discover anomalies in ancient rocks that previous generations of geologists missed simply because they lacked the tools to detect them. There is also work being done on understanding the theoretical limits of fossilization and preservation. How long can various materials persist? Under what conditions? What processes destroy evidence, and what processes preserve it? This research helps us understand what we should and should not expect to find from deep time. Some researchers are also taking a broader statistical approach, looking for patterns in the overall history of life on Earth that might indicate unusual events or interventions. This involves massive database analysis, looking at extinction rates, evolutionary patterns, biogeographic distributions, and other large-scale trends across hundreds of millions of years. If ancient civilizations had significant environmental impacts, those might show up as statistical anomalies in these databases, even if direct physical evidence cannot be found. There are also ongoing surveys of extreme environments on Earth that might preserve unusual records. The deep subsurface, kilometers below the surface, contains rocks that have been protected from erosion and weathering. Deep ocean sediments accumulate slowly over millions of years, creating detailed chronological records. Ancient lakes and restricted basins sometimes preserve laminated sediments with annual or seasonal layers stretching back millions of years. These environments might contain evidence that has been destroyed everywhere else. Interestingly, some of the most relevant research is happening not in geology or paleontology, but in archaeology. Archaeologists studying the collapse of historical civilizations are developing models of what causes civilizations to fail, how quickly they can vanish, and what traces they leave behind. This work is being extended deeper into the past, looking at the earliest human civilizations and even pre-human hominid sites. The techniques and insights developed for studying recent prehistory might eventually be applicable to much older time periods. There is also a philosophical and methodological discussion happening about how we define and detect intelligence. What are the essential signatures of intelligent activity? How do we distinguish them from natural processes? What assumptions are we making when we look for intelligence, and might those assumptions blind us to forms of intelligence very different from our own? This discussion, happening in fields ranging from artificial intelligence to animal cognition to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has relevance for searching for ancient terrestrial intelligence as well. But let us be honest about the challenges. The search for ancient civilizations faces obstacles that may be insurmountable. The evidence, if it exists, is fragmentary, ambiguous, and easily mistaken for natural phenomena. The timeframes involved are so vast that even carefully preserved evidence might have been destroyed multiple times over by geological processes. The resources available for investigation are minimal compared to the scale of the problem. And the scientific community, rightly skeptical of extraordinary claims, demands extraordinary evidence that might simply not exist. It is possible, perhaps likely, that we will never find convincing proof of ancient pre-dinosaur civilizations, not because they did not exist, but because the evidence has been too thoroughly erased by time. It is also possible that they never existed at all, that human intelligence is genuinely unique, at least on Earth, and that we are the first and perhaps only technological civilization this planet has produced. But it is also possible, just barely possible, that evidence exists and we have not yet developed the right methods to detect it, have not asked the right questions, have not looked in the right places. Science has a history of missing things that were there all along, waiting to be discovered. Continental drift was dismissed for decades before plate tectonics revolutionized geology. Meteorites were not accepted as real by the scientific community until the early 19th century, despite thousands of eyewitness accounts. The expansion of the universe was unexpected and initially resisted. Perhaps evidence of ancient civilizations exists in some form, encoded in patterns we have not learned to read, preserved in structures we have not learned to recognize, waiting for some future breakthrough in methodology or technology or insight to reveal it. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the universe has no obligation to provide us with answers, and some questions will remain forever unresolved. What we can do is remain curious, remain open-minded while also skeptical, and continue investigating. Every rock we analyze, every fossil we study, every pattern we discover in the geological record adds to our understanding of Earth's deep history. Whether or not ancient civilizations existed, that understanding is valuable in itself. It tells us how our planet works, how life evolves, how complex systems emerge and collapse. It provides context for our own existence and guidance for our own future. The search for ancient civilizations is, in a sense, a search for ourselves. It is an attempt to understand whether human intelligence and human civilization are typical or exceptional, whether the challenges we face are unique or universal, whether the story we are living has been told before or is genuinely new. These questions matter not because they have definitive answers, but because asking them expands our perspective and deepens our understanding. And so, the search continues, not as a major scientific priority, but as a minor thread in the larger tapestry of research, a question pursued by a few curious individuals, a possibility explored at the margins of mainstream science. Perhaps someday a breakthrough will occur, a new technique will reveal an unmistakable signature, a fortunate discovery will uncover preserved evidence. A pattern will emerge from data that cannot be explained by any known natural process. Or perhaps the question will remain forever open, a mystery that deep time keeps to itself, a secret buried too deeply for even our most sophisticated methods to uncover. Either way, the question will have been worth asking. As we approach the end of our journey through deep time, let us consider one final question, perhaps the most profound of all. What is consciousness? And could it have existed in forms we cannot imagine across the vast stretches of Earth's history? Consciousness is notoriously difficult to define. Philosophers have struggled with it for millennia. Scientists have only recently begun to study it empirically, and progress has been slow. We know consciousness exists because we experience it directly. The sensation of being aware, of experiencing qualia, of having an inner subjective life, is the most immediate and certain thing any of us can know. Yet we cannot agree on what it is, how it arises, or whether other organisms possess it. The problem is sometimes called the hard problem of consciousness, distinguished from the easy problems of explaining specific cognitive functions like perception, memory, or decision-making. The hard problem is explaining why any of these functions should be accompanied by subjective experience at all. Why does it feel like something to be conscious? Why is there an inner mental life rather than simply information processing occurring without awareness? Various theories have been proposed. Some argue consciousness emerges from specific types of information processing, perhaps when information is integrated in particular ways across a neural network. Some argue it requires specific physical processes, perhaps quantum effects in neurons. Some argue it is fundamental to the universe, that all matter possesses some primitive form of consciousness that becomes more complex and sophisticated in systems like brains. Some argue it is an illusion, that the sense of unified conscious experience is itself a trick the brain plays, and there is no central experiencer, only distributed processes creating the appearance of one. We do not know which, if any, of these theories is correct, but they have implications for our question about ancient civilizations. If consciousness requires specific neural architectures that only evolved relatively recently in Earth's history, then ancient organisms, no matter how complex their behavior, would have been unconscious automatons, responding to stimuli without any inner experience. In that case, even if they built structures or modified their environment, we might hesitate to call them civilizations in any meaningful sense. But if consciousness is more widely distributed, if it emerges from many different types of information processing systems, if it exists in forms we do not recognize, then the history of consciousness on Earth might be far richer and stranger than we imagine. Consciousness might have flickered into existence in the Cambrian seas as the first complex nervous systems evolved. It might have dawned in different forms in Ediacaran organisms with their alien architectures. It might exist today in organisms we dismiss as simple, experiencing inner worlds we cannot access or imagine. Some researchers have seriously proposed that even simple organisms like bacteria might possess primitive forms of consciousness, that the universe might be filled with experiencing subjects at every level of complexity. This view, called panpsychism, is taken seriously by some philosophers and neuroscientists as a potential solution to the hard problem of consciousness. If all matter has some experiential component, then the emergence of complex consciousness becomes less mysterious. It is just a matter of organizing and integrating these primitive experiential elements into more sophisticated forms. If panpsychism or something like it is true, then consciousness is not rare and precious, limited to a few species with complex brains. It is ubiquitous, varying in intensity and complexity, but present everywhere. In that case, Earth has been a conscious world since life began, perhaps since matter itself coalesced into our planet. The question would not be when consciousness arose, but when it became sophisticated enough to include self-awareness, abstract thought, technology, civilization. Even if we reject panpsychism and insist that consciousness requires specific types of complex information and processing, we must acknowledge our ignorance about the boundaries. Where exactly does consciousness begin and end? Do insects experience anything? Do fish? Do reptiles? We simply do not know. We have behavioral evidence suggesting that many animals experience pain, pleasure, fear, perhaps emotions and rudimentary thoughts. But we cannot know their inner experience directly. Now extend this uncertainty across deep time. Ancient organisms with complex behaviors, social structures, perhaps even tool use, might have been conscious in ways we cannot determine from fossil evidence. Their experience of the world might have been rich and complex, even if different from ours. They might have had cultures, memories, perhaps even primitive forms of language or symbolic thought. If an ancient species achieved something like human-level consciousness and intelligence 300 million years ago, what would their inner lives have been like? Would they have wondered about their place in the universe? Would they have developed philosophies, religions, art? Would they have experienced love, grief, joy, curiosity? Would they have looked up at the same stars we see and asked the same questions we ask? We have no way to know. Consciousness leaves no fossils. Even if we found definitive evidence of ancient civilization, artifacts and structures that proved intelligence existed, we could not determine whether that intelligence was accompanied by conscious experience. We could not know if anyone was home behind those alien eyes, or if complex behaviors emerged from unconscious information, processing without any inner life at all. This uncertainty should make us humble. It should remind us that other minds, whether human, animal, artificial, or ancient, might experience reality in ways utterly foreign to our own. The assumption that consciousness is rare and that human consciousness is the only type worth serious consideration has caused immense suffering throughout history. We have dismissed the experiences of animals, treated them as unconscious machines even as they showed clear signs of suffering. We have devalued the lives and experiences of other humans who seemed different or strange to us. If we ever do discover evidence of ancient civilizations, we should approach them with the same openness and respect we should extend to all forms of consciousness. We should not assume their values, their experiences, their very sense of being was like ours. We should try to understand on their own terms, if any terms for understanding can bridge such vast gulfs of time and difference. There is something both terrifying and beautiful about the possibility that consciousness has existed in many forms across Earth's history, that minds have opened and closed like flowers across deep time, experiencing and knowing and feeling, and then vanishing without trace. It suggests that consciousness, awareness, subjective experience is not special to us, but is woven throughout the fabric of life, perhaps throughout the fabric of the universe itself. It also suggests that what we do with our consciousness matters precisely because it is temporary. We have this brief moment of awareness, this flicker of subjective experience in the vast dark. What we do with it, how we treat other conscious beings, what we create and preserve and pass on to the future, these things matter not because they are permanent, but because they are real now, in this moment that is all we have. If ancient civilizations existed and were conscious, they experienced their own nows, their own moments of awareness and being. Those moments were real and meaningful even though they passed, even though the individuals who experienced them are gone, even though even the memory of them has been erased by time. The fact that consciousness is temporary does not make it less valuable. If anything, it makes it more precious. As you drift towards sleep, listening to this exploration of deep time and ancient possibilities, consider your own consciousness. Consider the extraordinary fact that you exist, that you are aware, that you experience this moment. Consider that this ability to be conscious might be far more common and far older than we typically assume, that it might stretch back through millions of years of evolution to forms and species we can barely imagine. Consider that whether or not ancient civilizations existed, consciousness has definitely existed in many forms throughout Earth's history. Animals in the Cambrian seas experienced their world. Dinosaurs experienced theirs. Countless species lived and felt and perceived across hundreds of millions of years, each with their own inner world, each mattering in the present moment of their existence. And consider that you are part of this great continuity, this river of consciousness flowing through time. You are a momentary eddy in that flow, complex and precious and temporary. What you experience, what you feel, what you know and love and create, these things are real, they matter. Not because they will last forever, but because they exist now. Whether ancient civilizations existed before the dinosaurs, whether consciousness is rare or common, whether we are alone or part of a long succession of intelligences that have risen and fallen across deep time, the fundamental reality of your own consciousness remains. You are here. You are aware. You are part of the universe that has become conscious of itself. That is extraordinary enough, whether or not anyone came before. We have journeyed together through 4 billion years of Earth's history, exploring one of the most provocative questions ever posed. Could an ancient civilization have lived before the dinosaurs? We have examined deep time, evolution, intelligence, extinction, evidence, and consciousness. We have considered arguments and counterarguments, possibilities and probabilities, speculation and science. What conclusion have we reached? In truth, we have reached no definitive conclusion because none is possible with current evidence. The question remains open, poised between possibility and improbability, between imagination and evidence. Ancient civilizations might have existed. The mathematics of deep time, the repeated evolution of intelligence, the incompleteness of the fossil record, all suggest that it is possible. Brief civilizations could have risen and fallen hundreds of millions of years ago, leaving traces so faint that we cannot detect them with current methods, or leaving no detectable traces at all. But they might not have existed. The apparent uniqueness of human intelligence, the specific combination of traits required for technological civilization, the lack of any convincing evidence despite extensive geological study, all suggest that we might be genuinely first, that intelligence capable of civilization arose only once on Earth, in us, recently. We do not know, and we may never know. Some questions might remain forever unanswered, lost in the depths of time that has erased even the memory of its own events. But the value of the question lies not in its answer, but in what asking it reveals. It reveals the vast scope of Earth's history, the extraordinary age of our planet, the countless forms life has taken, the cycles of creation and destruction that have repeated throughout geological time. It reveals the limits of our knowledge, the incompleteness of our records, the assumptions we make about uniqueness and permanence and the nature of intelligence itself. It reminds us that we are not permanent. Our species, our civilization, our works and achievements, all will pass as everything passes in deep time. We live in a moment, a brief flicker of consciousness between vast eternities of non-existence. Everything we build will crumble. Everything we create will decay. Even our planet itself will eventually be destroyed when our sun dies. But this is not a counsel of despair. It is an invitation to presence, to appreciating the extraordinary gift of this moment. You are alive right now. You are conscious. You are experiencing reality. This is not permanent, but it is real. It matters because you matter, not to the universe at large, not across geological time, but right now, in this moment, to yourself, and to those whose lives you touch. If ancient civilizations existed, they faced the same reality. They lived their nows, experienced their moments, created and loved, and wondered within the brief span allotted to them. Whether they left traces or vanished completely, whether we remember them or remain forever ignorant of their existence, they were real. Their consciousness was real. Their experience mattered, and so does yours. So does everyone's. Consciousness, wherever and whenever it arises, creates value and meaning simply by existing. The universe, in its vast reaches of space and time, occasionally organizes matter into patterns complex enough to experience themselves. When this happens, something extraordinary occurs. The universe becomes aware of itself. Matter looks back at its own existence with wonder. This is what you are. This is what we all are. Brief moments of cosmic self-awareness, temporary organizations of matter and energy that nevertheless experience and know and feel. Whether this has happened before, whether it will happen again, whether consciousness is rare or common in the universe, your own consciousness is real and valuable right now. As you drift into sleep, as your conscious awareness fades into dreams and then into the temporary darkness of deep rest, consider that you are participating in something ancient and universal. Sleep is a small death, a temporary cessation of consciousness that we all experience every day. And waking is a small birth, consciousness returning, awareness lighting up again like a candle in the dark. Civilizations too might sleep and wake across deep time. Perhaps consciousness on Earth has dimmed and brightened repeatedly, with each awakening thinking itself the first, unaware of what came before. Perhaps we are not pioneers but the latest in a long line of awakenings, each asking the same questions, each wondering if they are alone. Or perhaps we truly are first. Perhaps consciousness has only recently awakened on this planet with sufficient clarity to ask these questions, to wonder about its own existence, to seek evidence of earlier awakenings that never occurred. Perhaps we are the universe's first self-aware moment on Earth, the first time these particular atoms have organized themselves into something capable of wondering why. Either way, the responsibility is the same. We must take care of the world that created us, preserve the conditions that allow consciousness to exist, treat other conscious beings with respect and compassion, and try to leave things better than we found them. Not because we will be remembered forever, we won't be, but because consciousness and suffering and flourishing are real now, in this moment, and that is enough. The ancient civilizations, if they existed, are gone now. Their buildings have crumbled to dust. Their individuals have returned to the elements from which they were made. Even their species have vanished, their descendants either extinct or evolved into forms unrecognizable. Nothing they built has lasted. Nothing they achieved matters in any permanent sense. And yet, if they existed, they were real. Their moment mattered, the consciousness that arose in them, the experiences they had, the joys and sorrows and wonders of their existence. All of that was as real and meaningful as anything in your life is to you right now. The fact that it passed does not negate that it happened. This is the ultimate lesson of deep time. Nothing lasts, but everything that exists is real and valuable in its moment of existence. You are such a moment, a brief flowering of consciousness in a universe mostly devoid of awareness, a temporary pattern of extraordinary complexity in a cosmos trending towards simplicity, a fleeting experience of existence in the vast, eternal silence. Make your moment count. Not by trying to last forever, you won't, but by being fully present to the experience of being alive, by treating other conscious beings with kindness, by creating what beauty you can, by learning what truth you can, by loving who you can, by adding, in whatever small way you are able, to the sum of consciousness and compassion in the universe. If ancient civilizations existed, perhaps they learned this lesson too. Perhaps they achieved great things and then released them, understanding that permanence was neither possible nor necessary. Perhaps they lived fully in their moment, experienced deeply, created beauty not for the future, but for the present, and then passed peacefully into the great darkness from which all things come and to which all things return. Or perhaps they struggled and feared and grasped for immortality just as we do. Perhaps they tried to build monuments that would last forever, tried to make themselves permanent, tried to defeat time itself. If so, time won anyway. Time always wins. But that does not mean their struggle was meaningless. The attempt to create meaning in the face of impermanence is itself meaningful. The refusal to accept erasure, even when erasure is inevitable, is a noble and very conscious thing to do. You are engaged in that same struggle now, whether you realize it or not. By being alive, by being conscious, by caring about things, by trying to understand your world and your place in it, you are refusing the darkness. You are asserting that consciousness matters, that experience is valuable, that this brief moment of being deserves attention and effort and care. This is what civilizations do. This is what consciousness does. It carves out a small space of order and meaning in a universe that tends toward chaos. It creates temporary islands of complexity in an ocean of simplicity. It lights small candles against the dark, knowing they will eventually go out, lighting them anyway because the alternative is to live in darkness now. Whether ancient civilizations existed is ultimately less important than the fact that you exist now. Their moment, if it occurred, has passed. Yours is happening right now. This is your time to experience, to wonder, to create, to love, to know. This is your brief chance at consciousness, at being part of the universe's great awakening to itself. So rest now. Let consciousness fade into sleep. Let your mind drift through the spaces between thoughts, through memories and dreams, and the peaceful dark of deep rest. You have journeyed through 4 billion years tonight, through deep time and ancient possibilities. You have asked profound questions and lived briefly in the awareness of vast scales of time and space. Tomorrow, you will wake again. Consciousness will return, as it always does, as surprising and miraculous as always. You will have another day to experience, another chance to participate in the great mystery of being aware, being alive, being part of this strange and beautiful universe. And whether or not anyone came before us, whether or not ancient civilizations lived and died and vanished before the dinosaurs ever walked the earth, you will still be here, still conscious, still experiencing this extraordinary moment of existence. That is enough. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. Sleep well, fellow traveler through time. Rest in the knowledge that you are part of something ancient and ongoing, something larger than yourself, but not separate from you. You are the universe experiencing itself, consciousness looking back at its own existence with wonder. And that is the greatest mystery and the greatest gift of all.